It may only be the second week of Premier League action, but all eyes are on the Gunners.
All aboard the game train!
The second week of the Premier League is almost upon us, and it's throwing up a big fixture yet again. This week we've got Arsenal traveling to face Aston Villa, the team that beat them twice last year and was arguably the biggest reason why they weren't able to win the league title. Can Arsenal finally break that hoodoo? Could we take a look at that game, some of the other games that are intriguing ahead of this week? And we're also going to be taking a look at the most important games for fantasy football. I'm sure a lot of you out there are debating the Haaland triple captain, and a lot more. We'll be diving into that too. But starting things off, Arsenal. Last season, they travelled to Villa. They lost 1-0. Then they faced Villa at home, and they ended up losing 2-0. Villa in that first game scored early and for the most part sat back after that and were able to hold Arsenal off. Then in the second game, Arsenal failed to score in the first half while being dominant. And then Villa just slowly grew into the game and ultimately went on to score two late goals and get the win. And that is very interesting that they were kind of able to, it wasn't just their general style was what affected Arsenal. Unai Emery effectively outcoached Mikel Arteta in those two games last year. And that they win that Villa game, they likely win the league. What did Arsenal do last year? Arsenal travelled to play Manchester City away from home with the sole mentality of we just need to not lose this game. I don't want to hear anyone who says Arsenal just played that game right and they were trying to win. No, that wasn't true at all. Arsenal made a bet on themselves. They said, we'll go out here, make sure we don't lose, and then we'll win every other game left that we have this season, and we'll win the league. That was what they did. And that plan ultimately failed because they went on after that game, did a great job to draw 0-0 with City, but then they lost to Aston Villa. And the difference that beating Manchester City could have made, like you got to be ambitious. Fortune favors the brave. I will always believe that. And while maybe it looked like the right decision, it ultimately didn't work out for them. The goal for Arsenal has to be win every single game. There is no if, ands, or buts about it. The only way they can control what happens, the only way they can guarantee the title is by winning every single game. And yes, we're only in the second week of the Premier League season, but I don't care. Arsenal are absolutely under pressure to win this game because that's just what they have to do. I mean, yeah, there's no way you're going to win every game of a season. It's never happened. It's never going to happen. But Arsenal know how good and well they need to play in every single game, how important every result is if they want to beat this Manchester City team. Not only are they going to have to probably beat Manchester City twice, but they're going to have to win. They're going to have to win in the best bones of 30 games, if not more, this season in order to finally pip Manchester City. Manchester City just know what it takes to win the league, and they will always do enough to get that job done. So Arsenal can't. They tried it a couple of ways. The first year was kind of a surprise that they were in contention. They fell away towards the end. Then last year, they made a bet on themselves to beat everyone that wasn't named Manchester City, and they failed in that mission. Now this year, will it be the same again? I really feel like they need to beat Villa. They really need to show their gumption, show what level that they're at, and show that they're locked in. They look pretty good against Wolves last week. I'm interested to see Bukayo Saka. I mean, I know everyone believes he's star boy, he's the greatest thing ever, but I've seen him fail to deliver in more than a few games for Arsenal, especially away from home. I would love to see a big performance from him. I wouldn't call myself a critic of Saka. I believe he's extremely talented. I believe he is the best player on Arsenal and maybe maybe the best young English talent in the Premier League, but he's not perfect yet. Still a young player and still hasn't really reached the level of maybe some of the Manchester City stars. I would like to see him put in a big performance, maybe get a goal, get an assist, just have a good game against Aston Villa. That's something they need. He needs to be that lead guy for them. If they're not going to get a striker, he probably has to up his output. Like not that it like his output is already at a very high level, but you could make the argument he probably needs to be the guy that scores 20 Premier League goals for Arsenal this year if they're going to have a chance of the title, because it doesn't look like they're going to try and bring in another striker unless they make a late move for Ivan Toney. So big pressure on Arsenal, and for me, big pressure on Saka. Can they get this job done against a very good Villa team? This Villa team, no messing around last week. Good result. They were away to West Ham, obviously. Difficult opening fixture. Got the job done in the end. One thing that maybe might help Arsenal is that the fact that Ollie Watkins maybe looking not so fresh, maybe looking like he might need a little bit of time to get going this season. Wasn't really up to much in that West Ham game. That could change, but I would be willing to take a bet that maybe it'll take a few weeks before Watkins really starts firing on all cylinders. But Rogers and Bailey look sharp. Villa have other weapons outside of Watkins. Arsenal will need to be at their best if they're going to beat this Villa team at Villa Park. This will be the Villa's opening home fixture of the season. Going to be a raucous crowd. Going to be a great atmosphere. Villa are going to be really up for this game. Arsenal need to come to play. And I'm just going to say right now, Arsenal need to win this game. This is a very important game for Mikel Arteta, for Bukayo Saka, and just for Arsenal as a whole. This would be a huge win, even though it is only the second game of the season. The next game I want to talk about, that probably the other most intriguing game of the weekend, I think. Brighton hosting Manchester United, the early kickoff on Saturday, the game that will kick off this Premier League weekend. This one is very, very interesting. United, I think they obviously got Brighton at a good time last year. Last game of the season, Brighton had been struggling to finish out the season after falling out of Europe. Because that was just a bad end, and there was trouble with De Zerbi and all sorts. It was just a bit of a mess. So I'm not taking too much from United getting that 2-0 win. Before that, Brighton have won the 4 previous games against Manchester United home and away in the league. Brighton have kind of had Manchester United's number over the last while. This is a really early tester for Manchester United, and I'm quietly tempted to say this is must win. Maybe must win is a stretch, but this would be a game that would be very important to get a win for Eric Ten Hag. And of course, this is Manchester United going against Brighton. Manchester United should always be the favourites against Brighton. They should always be expected to beat Brighton, and that still stands. It's a tough away game. It's only the second game of the season. Things still haven't really got going yet. There's the likelihood that Xerxes probably still isn't fit enough to start for Manchester United, which I think is a blow, because it's just so much easier for every team when they're playing with a natural striker and not attacking midfielder or a winger playing through the middle. I have reason to believe we're probably going to see Bruno Fernandes in that role again. I think we could very likely see the same team that played against Fulham. Although I would be very interested to see. I feel like Garnacho could come into the team. I would love for it to be for Rashford, but it's more than likely probably going to be for Dallo or Diallo, I should say. We got teams with very similar names there, and he's not going to play instead of Diogo Dallo. He's going to start in front of instead of Amad Diallo. I kind of hope that doesn't happen in a sense. I think Garnacho, he's looked sharp. Obviously, came on and scored in the Community Shield. Then obviously came on and got the assist last week. But I guess I'd rather see Ahmad get another start than to see Garnacho come in for him, even though I guess there's more of a likelihood of Garnacho producing something over Ahmad. But I think Ahmad needs time, and he deserves a consistent run of starts in the team, and hopefully that's going to continue. It's like a free pass for Brighton. Their young manager, obviously they looked good last week against Everton, winning 3-0. Impressive. They've got the youngest manager in the league. I think he might be the youngest ever Premier League manager. This is like a free test for them. See where they're at. See what they can do. There'll be no real criticism of them, whatever the result is. So the pressure really is all on Manchester United. They need to be as solid as they were against Fulham. They didn't give up many chances, but Brighton will play a quicker, faster brand of football. They've got more of a threat on the wings, which United need to be ready to deal with. And then United just need to offer a bit more going forward. I think, like I said, it's a blow that we're probably not going to see Xerxes starting, because I think we did create some chances. Like that game against Fulham, we were the better team. We created the better chances, just as simple as that. And when didn't get the goal until Xerxes came on. Hopefully, I think if Bruno Fernandes gets the chances that he got in that Fulham game, I'd expect him to score at least one. If he gets another 2 or 3 chances like he had against Fulham, because I think he is a good finisher. But that's going to be United's lack of a clinical finishing is a big problem for them. It was clear throughout preseason, and then obviously it was evident again in the opening game of the season. It's more so now the problem is not being able to finish rather than not creating. Last season there was a lot of times where they weren't even creating chances. At least now they're creating them. Now can they score the goals? This is a really early tester for this Manchester United team. Ten Hag could really do with a result. There's going to be pressure on him and question marks straight off the bat if they lose, and maybe even if they don't pick up a win. But this is going to be an interesting battle. Early kickoffs always kind of interesting. United usually don't like traveling to Brighton the last few years. This is going to be a tough one, but definitely one to keep an eye on over this weekend. Other fixtures that look interesting. I think West Ham need a win. I think they're traveling to Crystal Palace. Both teams lost their opening game, so both teams are really going to be up for it. I think Lopetegui could do with a win. They weren't great against Aston Villa. Obviously, Aston Villa are a stronger team than Palace, but Palace still have a lot of quality. I think West Ham could do with the win there, even though there's more pressure on them to get that W than there is on Palace, despite both teams losing their opening fixture. Chelsea away to Wolves, that's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, all the talk was, oh, we can't really judge Chelsea too harshly because they were playing against Manchester City in the opening week. I'm ready to judge Chelsea very harshly, so I'm interested to see how they're going to play against Wolves and what sort of performances we're going to get. Do we see more from Nkunku? Do we see more from Jackson? Do we see more from Palmer? Just all around, I'm expecting to see a lot, even though it's still early days. Not to say the result means everything, but the performance is going to be important in my eyes. Liverpool obviously going for their first home game under Arne Slot. That's going to be unbelievable atmosphere. That's obviously the 4:30 kickoff on Saturday or on Sunday. The game that closes the weekend should be a great atmosphere. I'm expecting big things out of the Liverpool boys in that one. I could see them with a 2-3 4-0 win there, even though Brentford are capable of setting up and being tough to beat. I think Liverpool could really open the floodgates in this one. And then the last thing I got my eye on is the newly promoted teams. Can any of them pick up their first win? Ipswich, absolutely not. They are away to Manchester City. Southampton are at home to Nottingham Forest. That's a game they need to be winning, in my opinion. As much as I believe Nottingham Forest have a lot more quality, and it would be a bad result if they lost that, especially after failing to hold on to the win against Bournemouth. These are the games that Southampton, if they're going to stay up, they're going to have to pick up points in these sort of games. So pressure on them to win. Leicester going away to Fulham won't be easy, but I think if they play a bit more aggressively than they did against Spurs, I think they could potentially get a result. But I also expect Fulham to create more against a team like Leicester and be tough to beat. I think the Fulham are an interesting package this year. I'm really interested to see how they go, especially against some of the weaker teams. Can they put together a strong run and make a push for the top half of the table? Then we go over to the fantasy fixtures. 3 games I want to talk about here. First up, Manchester City versus Ipswich. Do you triple captain Erling Haaland? Big time fantasy player here. maybe not always the best. My bias often gets the best of me when I like to pick three Manchester United players, even though they're terrible, and I believe in young guys that really I have no business believing in, and that usually leaves a hole in my points every week, and I usually end up struggling. But I won a couple of my public leagues last year, struggled against my mates, but fantasy is a big part of football these days. Haaland was the man, is when you say was is the man versus the newly promoted teams last year. He averaged 2.67 big chances per game. He scored 4 goals in 4 games last season against newly promoted teams. Obviously, only played 1 game against both Luton and Sheffield United. I think it might be too early in the season to triple captain, but if you have Haaland in your team, I think he has to get the captain's armband. The question is if City are bothered. City can choose what result they're going to get against Ipswich, I believe. I think if they want it to be 2-0, they can have it that. They want it to be 5-0, they can do it that way. It's going to be interesting to see, do they give up a goal? Because they were like that last year. They, even games that they won comfortably, they usually ended up giving up a goal. There was a lot of 3-1s and 4-1s and 5-1s rather than 4 or 5-0. So it's going to be interesting to see if they keep a clean sheet. But I'm going to say too early in the season to captain Haaland, or so to triple captain Haaland. But if he's in your team, I think don't try and be smart. Don't try and have a differential. Give Erling Haaland the captain's armband. Another interesting player in that game is Jeremy Doku. Could he have a takeover similar to what we saw against Bournemouth last season? When Manchester City played Bournemouth at home last year, they won 6-1. Doku had 1 goal and 4 assists in that game. That was really his breakout moment. He didn't really build on it, but last week he looked really sharp. He was attacking like those Chelsea defenders that wanted nothing to do with Jeremy Doku last week. I think he could really dominate against his Ipswich team, whether that's creating, scoring goals himself. I think he would be a type of player that I think is worth taking a chance on bringing into your team this week. Only 6.5 million in fantasy, so pretty easy to just use one transfer to get him in, your one free transfer this week if you don't already have him. I think he could be a great differential. I'd like to say for the whole season, but I think definitely for this game home against Ipswich, I feel like he could maybe challenge Erling Haaland for the most likely to score big points in that fixture. So Jeremy Doku, keep an eye on him. If you have a free transfer, if you don't like some of your 6.5 million midfielders or you currently have, I think Doku could be a great piece there. Next fixture, Spurs Everton. This is a really, really interesting one for fantasy. This is Dominic Solanke's home debut. He looked sharp against Leicester. I think it felt like the goal was going to come from at some point, especially in that first half when obviously Spurs died off and kind of stopped playing and stopped getting chances. That hit him hard. Home debut, I expect Spurs to create a lot. I expect him to get chances and I expect him to score goals. This is like an early test for him, as a true fantasy asset this year. I like home against Everton, their first home game of the season. Everton looked really bad last week against at home to Brighton. I know Everton are always capable of being resolute defensive. They're also capable of leaking goals if you play fast and hard, which Spurs are more than capable of doing. So I'm very interested to see what Solanke returns. I don't have him in my team, but anyone who's got both Haaland and Solanke in their front line should be very excited ahead of this weekend. I'm also looking at Madison in this one. Got an assist last week. This is an early test if he's someone that's going to be a fantasy differential this year. He needs to deliver consistently. He needs to offer more. Even though he kind of is like the hub of the Spurs attack, I expect more, and I expect him to deliver in home fixtures against the likes of Everton and the teams of that nature that are around the bottom of the table. I expect him to really show his class then. This is very early in the season. You're not gonna. I'm ready to judge him. I want to see him get back to the levels we saw early last season, and that's a question mark just for Spurs as a whole. If he can get back to delivering with that sort of consistency, that could maybe take Spurs to the next level, and that could really make them a more clinical side, which is what they absolutely need to be. The defensive side of the ball is also very interesting. This one, Spurs do not keep clean sheets. They absolutely hate keeping clean sheets, which is why it's always very dangerous to own one of their defenders. I currently have Mickey Van de Ven in my back line because he's only 4.5 million. He should have kept a clean sheet against Leicester, but obviously couldn't do it because Spurs stopped playing and some lax defending left Jamie Vardy free at the back post, and boom, clean sheet is gone. Spurs need to keep clean sheets against the likes of Everton at home. They should have done it last week. They need to do it in home games. They need to do it against teams like Everton who don't really have much of an offensive threat, and Spurs should be dominating. They need to be able to rely on their backline more to get them results and keep them results. Because in games when they're up 1-0, but there's still a half or a half an hour to go, you don't really believe Spurs are going to win unless they get that next goal. So this is a big tester fixture for Spurs and the value of some of their fantasy assets. Like Pedro Porro is always going to be a good one because, like we saw in the first game, he gets involved in goals. So you can take the risk with him if you can afford him at 5.5 million. But the likes of a Romero, of a Udogi, of a Van de Ven, you have to really think about them ones, because if they're not keeping clean sheets, what the hell is the point of even having them? And they need to do it against teams like Everton. Last one I want to mention here is Isak. Obviously, didn't he got an assist in the opening fixture, which is actually a great return considering the fact that Newcastle played with 10 men for about an hour. Hopefully, we get to see him stick around with 11 on the field for the whole game against Bournemouth, and we will see his first goals of the season. I don't think you need to panic if you're any doubts about Isak. They will be eased this weekend. I could see him scoring against Bournemouth. I think you need to give him a chance because I think he's really going to produce at a high level this year. But that's a wrap on the fantasy corner. Second week of Premier League action. Like I said last week, it's just great to have it back. I'm excited for this week. We could really get that splashy game, that splashy result that really sparks the season into life. But pressure this week. The pressure is on three teams: Arsenal, Manchester United, and Spurs. Spurs need a big win and a clean sheet. Manchester United could really do with a win, and Arsenal definitely need a win. We'll be back to cover, see how it all goes down after the weekend's action. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know who you're thinking of captaining in fantasy. Do you think there is pressure on Arsenal to win this game? Do you think Manchester United need to get the win? Do you believe in Spurs' fantasy assets? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and make sure you subscribe for much more so you think you know ball.